60 years ago, on November 22nd, 1963, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. A book has just come out by Judge Burt Griffin in Cleveland, Ohio. It's called JFK, Oswald, Ruby, Politics, Prejudice and Truth. You're going to hear the real story, what really happened, all the twists, all the turns. This may be our most fascinating podcast yet. Stay tuned.
Welcome to another episode of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm your host, Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland State University College of Law. You know, I've had the great privilege to live my life at the intersection of the public, private, nonprofit, and academic worlds. As a practicing lawyer, CEO of 2 large nonprofit organizations, and as an Ohio State Representative, State Senator, Attorney General, and Lieutenant Governor. And the lessons I've learned come down really to just 2 words: justice and leadership. That's why every week we'll talk to people who are walking the walk. We'll learn the leadership lessons of these highly effective leaders. Some are lawyers and some are not, but all of them have something in common. They are change makers. They are custodians of democracy. They are guardians of justice. They are living justice, and they are living leadership.
Welcome to another edition of Living Justice, Living Leadership, a podcast where I have the opportunity to interview very, very interesting people who I consider to be great leaders. And today, I get to interview somebody who I've considered a friend and a mentor for a long, long time. I've known him really, I don't know, maybe probably more than 40 years. And I also happen to know his son as well. So I want to introduce to all of you Judge Burt Griffin.
How do you do?
Thanks again for being here today, Judge. The reason we have you today, even though we could have you for lots of reasons, there's a particular reason, and that is you've just written a fascinating book, JFK, Oswald and Ruby, Politics, Prejudice and Truth. You have a very special vantage point on this because you were one of the original members of the Warren Commission that investigated the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. People of my generation and your generation can remember exactly where they were the moment they heard that President Kennedy was shot. It is not unlike, in some ways, the tragedy of 9/11, even though 9/11 was a much greater tragedy in terms of the proportion of people. At that time, it shook the earth just as 9/11 did. And just as we all remember where we were on 9/11, we also remember where we were on November 22nd, 1963. So I want to begin, Judge, just very briefly, explaining to people how it is you got on the Warren Commission. Now, we are going to back up after that and talk a little bit about your life, but we'll start specifically with what gives you the expertise to write such an extraordinary book.
Well, there's a difference between what gives me the expertise to write the book and how I happen to be a member of the Warren Commission staff.
Okay.
You got to remember that this was 1963. And the staff was, the leadership of the staff, the commission itself, were looking for diversity. Well, diversity in 1963 was a little different from diversity in 2023. They were looking for geographic diversity and political diversity, but they were also looking for people who had some experience either as criminal lawyers or as trial lawyers. And I happen to know a Cleveland lawyer who had left his Cleveland law firm and became an assistant to Attorney General Robert Kennedy. And so he was contacted, and his contribution to diversity was to get somebody from the city of Cleveland or the Midwest.
Okay, so in those days, Midwest was diversity, huh?
Yeah, so I fit the qualifications, and he called me. I frankly thought he had dialed the wrong number, but he assured me that he was calling me to ask if I would be interested in applying for the staff, the Assistant Counsel to the Warren Commission itself. And I said absolutely, and started to pack my bags immediately.
Well, it certainly was no accident that he called you, because you already were pretty distinguished. You were a graduate of Yale Law School. You knew a number of people on the Warren Commission who were fellow graduates. So let's take a moment back, rewind, and talk about your life, and then we'll get into the depth about the book itself. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you eventually became not only an author, but also a judge.
Well, I was born and reared in Cleveland, and I live across the street from where I went to elementary school,
Wow.
which is Boulevard School in Shaker Heights. So I've been a long time Cleveland resident, although I served a period in the Army. I was drafted during what was still officially the Korean War, although nobody was shooting at anybody. It was substantially after the shooting had ended. I went to Amherst, as I say, I went through the Shaker school system. I was the editor, believe it or not, of the Shaker High School newspaper.
Was that called the Shakerite then?
It was still called the Shakerite.
Okay.
And I then went to Amherst College and was the program director of the radio station. And then after serving this tour in the Army, I got admitted to Yale Law School, and I was a member of the Law Journal. Was not called the Law Review, it was the Law Journal, and I was the comment editor of the Law Journal. And then, believe it or not, I became a law clerk to a Court of Appeals judge in the District of Columbia, whose name was George Washington.
Really?
His name was absolutely. He was actually a descendant of the Washington family. Now, the original George didn't have any children, but he had a brother, and I think he was a descendant of Samuel Washington. And still, believe it or not, he was married to a woman who was a descendant of Patrick Henry.
Amazing.
Absolutely,
amazing.
Absolutely amazing. So I did my tour of service as a law clerk to Judge George Washington, and then came back to Cleveland and was an assistant United States attorney in the last days of the Eisenhower administration and the beginning days of the Kennedy administration.
Okay.
Then I joined what was in those days a small law firm, McDonald, Hopkins, and Hardy.
Yep. Now a large firm today.
I think I was the sixth lawyer there. They now have, I'm sure, over 200 lawyers.
Yeah, it's a big law firm now. That's right.
Yeah, yes, it is. So, and then and that was the period then when I was contacted by my friend who worked for Robert Kennedy and became a member of the Warren Commission staff. Now, do you want me to continue on?
Yes, we're almost done with your biography, but I want people to know that you became a judge, because I want our audience to know, especially those outside of Cleveland, that you're one of the most distinguished members of the judiciary in the history of Cleveland. And I really mean that. Nobody was better liked and well respected than you. So we have to talk a little bit how you went from the practice of law to be a judge.
Well, when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I said I joined McDonald Hopkins and then got selected to be with the Warren Commission staff. I came back to McDonald Hopkins, but then I had another opportunity, which was I was invited to head the expanding Legal Aid Society. These were in the early years of the Johnson administration. And money was being provided to expand legal aid programs all over the country. And the Cleveland Legal Aid Society got money for its expansion. So it then changed from a group of part-time lawyers who had private practices to full-time staff at the Legal Aid Society. And we opened up half a dozen offices in local neighborhoods. It was a substantial expansion, both of staff, geography, and actually the kind of work that we did. I then was asked in the very last days of the Johnson administration to become the national director of the legal services program, and that was, we were involved in funding legal aid programs throughout the country. So I went back to Washington, headed the staff. That was a nationwide effort, as I indicated, to finance legal aid programs. And then a tragedy happened in my personal life. My wife died at a very young age, and we had two very young children. So I came then back to Cleveland and become a full-time father and work again full-time with the Legal Aid Society, although my successor remained as the director of the Legal Aid Society. And some of your listeners may remember him, Lionel Jones.
Definitely.
And so
Lionel, by the way, was a graduate of this law school.
That's right.
That's right.
A very distinguished graduate. So then I decided to run for judge after I had been back 6 years, and this was 1974. Yes, 1974. So that was 10 years after I left my work with the Warren Commission. And I was elected a judge and served as a trial judge in the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court for 30 years.
30 years. Wow.
Yes.
Well, we'll do another podcast someday to talk about those 30 years as judge. But today, we're going to rewind back to the time when you joined the Warren Commission. And, a lot of the students at our law school, Cleveland State University College of Law, and law students around the country, for that matter, were not born at the time that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So I think it's worth us going for a few minutes and describe exactly what happened on November 26, 1963. And you can give the quick summary, and then we'll go back into a lot of detail and talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, that you're a special expert on, and all the aspects of the case. But let's go a little of the facts first.
Well, President Kennedy was making a political campaign tour. It was very early on in the stages of the 1964 presidential election campaign. But he was making a 3-day trip to Texas. And the second day of that trip was to come to Dallas. And as he was ending the motorcade through a place called Dealey Plaza, he was hit by 2 bullets. One which struck him in the neck, in the back of the neck, and if I may here, I don't know how much of this is visible, but
we can see
the back of the neck, and it exited from the front. He threw up his hands when this happened, and within seconds later, he was shot in the back of the head. It was determined that there were actually 2 witnesses to the shooter. He was on the 6th floor window of the southeast corner of the Texas School Book Depository, and 2 witnesses identified him, immediately went to the police. A description was given of the shooter, and what we do know is that the shooter was Lee Harvey Oswald, who worked at the Texas School Book Depository, the building from which the shots were fired. Oswald left the building within just a couple of minutes, walked quickly to a bus, hailed a bus, incidentally, did not actually get on the at a normal stop, but there was a traffic jam, and he hailed the bus. The bus let him on. He got on the bus. He was identified on the bus by his landlady.
Huh.
And he rode the bus for a very short while, a couple of blocks, and again got stopped in traffic. He got out, walked, got a taxi cab at the Greyhound bus station, took the taxi to go by the rooming house that he was living in. He did not stop at the rooming house. He passed the rooming house. The cab driver let him out about.
By the way, I'm guessing, Judge, that he didn't stop at the rooming house because he thought maybe he was a suspect and that's where they'd be looking for him, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Exactly correct. So, but they weren't looking for him there because he had actually given his address as the address where his wife was living in Irving, Texas. And so they did not have his address. And when the cab let him out, he walked back to the rooming house, put on a coat, a jacket. It was November. Interestingly enough, significantly, he had left the jacket that he had worn to work at the Texas School Book Depository. So he quickly wanted to get out of there.
And by the way, he worked at the depository, didn't he?
That's correct.
Right.
So he went to the rooming house, put on a different jacket, and he had a pistol there. He brought his pistol and a number of bullets, and he left immediately from the rooming house and began walking in this residential neighborhood. He was spotted by a police officer who was on patrol at that time, and we can only surmise that the officer had heard the description of the shooter that was given over police radio, and when he saw Oswald, and Oswald reasonably met the description, about the same height and weight. The officer stopped Oswald, got out of the car, and Oswald, when the officer, whose name was J.D. Tippett, got in front of the car and was coming around to the curb to talk to him, Oswald fired 3 shots at him. He fell immediately and then went to his fallen body and fired another shot in his head, and then began to walk quickly to get away. He was, and I won't go into the details of his further flight, other than to say that he wound up in the Texas Theater, and the police, within 15 minutes of that shooting of Officer Tippett, and when the police officers had the lights turned on in the theater and began to approach him, he pulled a gun on the police officer, tried to shoot him. The police officer grabbed his gun and blocked it. Actually kept the gun from firing, and he was arrested. And so within approximately an hour of the shooting of President Kennedy, he was arrested and taken back to the Texas School Book Depository. Amazing, yeah. Amazing job on the part of the eyewitnesses, and there were a number of other people who observed these shootings, so that the shooting of Officer Tippett was actually observed by 2 witnesses, and other witnesses saw him fleeing. So, and the witnesses cooperated quickly and gave identifications of him, and he was arrested.
So I want our listeners to know, particularly those who did not live at that time, that although there's lots of controversy surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy, it's never been disputed who killed him. The evidence based upon the story you've just told is very clear. that it was, in fact, Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, there are open questions. What was his motive? Did he have any accomplices? How many bullets? All those kinds of things we're going to talk about in this podcast. But everybody should know no one ever doubted that the person who pulled the trigger was Lee Harvey Oswald. Is that correct?
Well,
Oh, maybe I'm
yes,
wrong on that one too.
yeah, yes and no, Lee.
In other words, there could have been a second bullet and a second person, right?
That's right. There,
Okay.
Oswald himself denied that he was the shooter, and yes, there are a whole lot of conspiracy theories that are trying to suggest that there was a second shooter, and some people have actually claimed that he was not the shooter.
Okay, then I guess I'm even wrong about that.
Yeah.
That's fair. Okay,
But let me say this to you, if you and to our listeners here, our viewers, if the evidence that I have just recited of the identifications that we do have in the ultimate shooting of Officer J.D. Tippit and later trying to shoot a police officer, arresting a police officer in the Texas theater, would you want to have to defend this guy?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Chief Justice Warren, who for whom the Warren Commission is named, and who was our boss, he had been the county prosecutor in Alameda County, California, which is Oakland, for 10 years. And he, at one point, told us as the staff that if he were trying that case, he would have convicted Oswald in 3 days.
Really?
Yeah. So I think the evidence is really extremely strong that Oswald was the shooter.
Now, having said all that, though, this, my recollection is this was considered to be a state crime, not a federal crime, even though it was the killing of the president. Is that right?
That's right. There was no, believe it or not, in 1963, it was not a federal crime simply to kill a federal officer. There was only a federal crime if it occurred on federal property, and this killing occurred in Dallas.
Amazing. Which is why the Dallas police were really leading the investigation. FBI and Secret Service were involved, but they were not front and center. They were sort of behind the scenes partners. Is that correct?
Absolutely. They were they supplied a certain amount of the forensic evidence, and they immediately, the FBI and the Secret Service immediately began its own investigation because the fear was right from the beginning that this was a conspiracy.
Judge, where were you at the moment that John F. Kennedy was shot at and killed?
Well, I know where I was when I first heard it.
Okay.
And
that would have been probably within an hour or two, right?
It was less than an hour.
Okay.
And I was returning from lunch to my law office in the East Ohio building on 9th Street. Stepped onto the elevator, and one of the people said, "The president has been shot." And that's when I heard it coming back from lunch. And you know what my reaction was, Lee? Those damn segregationists.
Yes. And I think the viewers should understand that the reason you probably thought that is that this was really at a time when segregation was alive and well, particularly in the South and particularly in the state of Texas.
Yes. And Brown versus Board of Education had been in effect, but the people in the South were doing everything they could to resist the integration of the schools. And one of the factors which ultimately, we may talk about this, I hope, at some point, one of the factors that affected Oswald himself had to do with the attempt and the successful integration of the University of Mississippi in 1962 in the very end of September, the first day of October of 1962. And the result of that was that the leader of a crowd that was trying to stop James Meredith from integrating the university of Mississippi. The leader of that crowd was a former Major General of the United States Army who Kennedy had relieved of his command, and his name was Edwin Walker, who lived in Dallas.
And as I recall, just months before the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald himself tried to kill the general. Is that right?
That's correct. On April 10th of 1963, Oswald, with the same rifle with which he shot President Kennedy, it was a rifle that he purchased for the purpose of killing General Walker. On April 10th, attempted to murder Walker while he was in his own house on the first floor, preparing, April 10th, was preparing his income tax return. And Oswald fired a shot which turned out to be deflected by a pane in the window. Oswald fled and was never suspected, and it was never revealed until his wife, after he was arrested and killed, that is after Oswald was killed, his wife revealed that he had confessed to her that he was the shooter of General Walker.
Now, after reading your book, I now better understand that General Walker was sort of like a Joe McCarthy-like figure. He was anti-communist, he was anti-socialist, but he was also anti-John F. Kennedy. So it isn't ironic that Lee Harvey Oswald is trying to kill a man who actually hated John F. Kennedy.
That's right. And if we can talk about this for a few minutes.
Sure.
After Walker was arrested for the attempt to prevent James Meredith from integrating the University of Mississippi, and he was arrested the day after in Mississippi, the day after Meredith successfully integrated the school, and he was charged with. This may sound familiar to people. He was charged with causing a riot. And
in fact, didn't they say it was insurrection?
They said it was insurrection.
Which does sound familiar.
That does sound very familiar. And he was arrested for that. And he made bond. And this, I don't think this will surprise anybody, but in January of 1963, that is approximately 4 months later, a Mississippi grand jury declined to indict him.
Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm.
And that's the point at which Oswald bought his rifle and decided to assassinate Walker. Okay. And the reason he gave to his wife for wanting to assassinate Walker was that he was a subscriber to the U.S. communist newspaper, The Worker. And The Worker, after the arrest of Walker, the Worker ran an editorial calling Walker another Hitler. And when Marina, his wife, Oswald's wife, asked Oswald why he shot at Walker, he said, if somebody had killed Hitler, millions of lives would have been saved.
My understanding is that if you digged a little deeper, that the main reason that Lee Harvey Oswald was trying to kill Walker was not because he hated JFK, but that he was anti-communist. And in a sense, Lee Harvey Oswald was pro-communist. Is that right?
That's right. Okay. Lee Harvey Oswald had defected to the Soviet Union and had lived in the Soviet Union for 2.5 years and became disillusioned with Soviet communism. He did not believe it was what Karl Marx really wanted. Oswald, even though he never graduated from high school, read extensively. and read the works of Marx and Engels. So he came back to the United States hoping to be a leader in the Marxist movement in the United States.
And he did have a communist hero, and it wasn't in Soviet Union, right? It was somewhere else.
It was in Cuba.
Right.
And after he unsuccessfully tried to murder Walker, Marina persuaded him to leave Dallas and to go and live in New Orleans, where he had originally been born and still had family. But New Orleans, and he got to New Orleans in late May of 1963. But that was a way station as far as he was concerned. It was a way station to Cuba, because what he really wanted to do was become a part of the Castro revolution that was taking place not only in Cuba, but in the rest of Latin America. So in late September of 1963, he went to Mexico City and tried to persuade the Cuban embassy in Mexico City to give him a visa to go to Cuba. But he was turned down, and he came back to the United States and back to Texas on October 3rd, just, you can add at the time, but just a few weeks before the assassination of President Kennedy. His mind was not on Kennedy. His mind was on encouraging a Marxist revolution and preventing a man whom he regarded as a fascist from becoming another Hitler and becoming the president of the United States. And that's why he shot at Walker.
Well, Judge, we're now 30 minutes into the podcast, and we still haven't mentioned another figure that is part of the title of your book. It's JFK Oswald, and there's a third person. His name is Jack Ruby. And the world expert on Jack Ruby is Judge Burt Griffin, because that was your assignment on the Warren Commission. Am I right?
That was my assignment.
So let's talk about what happened after Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested, and how does Jack Ruby enter the picture?
Well, Jack Ruby killed, and many of us, and I don't know what you were looking at.
I was watching it like you were, right on television live.
We saw on live television Jack Ruby in the basement of the Dallas police station murder Lee Harvey Oswald. So why did he do it?
And who was he?
And who was this guy? He had originally been born of immigrant parents, Jewish immigrant parents, in Chicago, and after the Second World War ended, he had a sister who by that time had moved to Dallas and had a nightclub, and he came for the purpose of starting another nightclub. And he started a striptease club called the Carousel Club. And he came there in 1947 or 1948, and he changed his name from Rubenstein to Ruby. He was very sensitive to anti-Semitism, and one of the things that happened was that after Oswald shot General Walker in April, there was a wave of anti-Semitic vandalism in Dallas because the Walker supporters thought that Oswald, that the person who had shot at Walker was probably Jewish.
They had no evidence, but that was their prejudiced assumption.
That's right, and there were threats made to one of the temples. The Neiman Marcus people vandalized the windows of Neiman Marcus, which is a very well-known, very successful, well-known upscale not supermarket, department store.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, there had already been a reaction, an anti-Semitic reaction to what Oswald had done. So that when Ruby became the first conspiracy investigator, that what happened was that on the morning that President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, there was a full-page black-bordered anti-Kennedy ad that was signed with the name Bernard Weissman, chairman. And Ruby recognized Weissman as a Jewish name, and Ruby's belief was that nobody who was Jewish would be anti-Kennedy. And yet this was an anti-Kennedy ad, and it had a black border on it, full-page ad with a black border. And Ruby suspected that the black border indicated that it was somehow tied to the death of the president. And so he set out to find Weissman. And Ruby was a great criminal investigator. Ruby didn't know of anybody he'd heard of named Bernard Weissman in the small Jewish community in Dallas. So he looked in the telephone directory, and there was no Weissman in the telephone directory. And then he talked to his lawyer, and his lawyer suggested that he look in a street directory, and he looked in the street directory, and there was no Weissman in the street directory.
Did Bernard Weissman ever exist?
Bernard Weissman absolutely existed.
Okay.
And the irony of this was that Bernard Weissman was a Walker supporter. And he had recently been released from the army and was a part of a very small group of veterans that had determined, who were very conservative, and they were determined that they were going to infiltrate the conservative movement, and the starting point would be Dallas, because it was a very conservative community, and so he was persuaded. Weissman was persuaded to come to Dallas, and came approximately 3 weeks before the assassination occurred. And there's another connection of this to Walker also.
Okay.
A month before Kennedy was assassinated in approximately October 22nd of 1963.
Let me guess. I think we're going to be talking about Adlai Stevenson here.
That's right.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
General Walker had persuaded his followers to disrupt a speech that Stevenson gave in Dallas on approximately October 22nd.
And Adlai Stevenson was in the Kennedy administration, right?
That's correct. He was the ambassador to the United Nations.
Okay.
And so the Walker movement disrupted the speech, and when Stevenson left the speech, a Walker supporter struck Stevenson on the forehead with an anti-Stevenson sign, and that made national headlines, and so that the Dallas police were quite worried that something like what was done to Kennedy, what was done to Stevenson, would be done to Kennedy when Kennedy arrived in Dallas. So that the primary concern for both federal law enforcement people and Dallas people was the Walker group. And in fact, Walker himself was so concerned that the Walker people would be blamed for the assassination, or would be blamed for anything that was done to Kennedy, that Walker arranged to be on an airplane flight in Louisiana, And when the word came out, and he was on the flight, when word came to the passengers on the flight that Kennedy had been shot, he got up out of his seat and went to the attendants in the airplane, got their names, and made it clear to the attendants that he was on that airplane flight and was not in Dallas.
He was building his own legal defense.
He was building his own. So he was so frightened that he would be blamed for the assassination that he had deliberately left Dallas on the day of the assassination. But back to Jack Ruby. Ruby then did everything he could to find out what was happening in the investigation of the assassination of the president. So on Friday night, just hours after the assassination, Ruby arranged to be at a press conference in the Dallas police station, in which Oswald was displayed the people who were there. Ruby was then, and here's how Ruby got there. Ruby went to temple services that night. And after the services, he went to a delicatessen and ordered 6 corned beef sandwiches and 6 bottles of pop, and took them to the police station to serve the police officers. And he made a badge for himself. He said he was a reporter for the Israeli press, and he made a little badge for himself that said press.
Oh my God.
So here was Ruby, absolutely determined. He was on his own investigation, trying to find out whatever evidence the Dallas police had. Then later that morning, on Saturday morning, Ruby got the idea that there was an impeach Earl Warren billboard that was on one of the streets near one of the freeways in Dallas, and that somehow that this impeach Earl Warren billboard was connected to the anti-Kennedy Bernard Weissman ad.
Oh my God.
Newspaper. So at about 4 o'clock in the morning, he got his the fellow who stayed overnight in his nightclub, his night watchman, to get a camera, and they went with and Ruby then drove him to the impeach Earl Warren billboard for the purpose of taking a photograph of it. And incidentally, Ruby didn't know who Earl Warren was.
Really? Even though he was the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, am I right?
He did not know who. He asked who Earl Warren was, but he somehow had the idea that the billboard and the blackboard ad with the Weissman name on it were all connected. So I'm going to shortcut this story a little bit. I want people to read my book and get more of the details.
Of course. And we also want the podcast to end on the same day it begins.
Yeah, right. So in any event, Ruby winds up shooting Oswald because of this set of circumstances. On Sunday morning, when he gets up, he has a phone call from one of his strippers. Her name was Little Lynn. And Little Lynn, he had closed his nightclub for Friday and Saturday night. She had not been paid, and she needed money. So he said he would go to the Western Union office, which was 1 block from the Dallas police station where Oswald was being held, and that he would send her a money order, so that we know that 4 minutes before he shot Oswald in the basement of the Dallas police station, he was sending a money order to Little Lynn. Not only this, but I think dog owners would be interested in this. He was a lover of dogs, and his favorite dog was a dog named Sheba, which he had with him all the time. So that when he went downtown to send a Western Union money order, and he had his dog in the car, and he parked his car and left his dog in the car as he went to the Western Union office. But then he saw a crowd that was had assembled outside of the Dallas police station, waiting for Oswald to be moved to the Dallas County Jail. So Ruby walked 1 block from the Western Union office down the ramp into the police garage, and arrived there just about 60 seconds before Oswald was brought out to an awaiting van. And as you and I and so many others then did, saw Ruby shoot Oswald.
Now, Judge, as you describe that, it's interesting. It sounds to me, unless I'm misunderstanding the story, that this wasn't so premeditated as people thought. He had a pistol with him, though, but it sounds like he didn't deliberately know exactly where and when Oswald would be. Is that true?
That's right. He was hoping that Oswald would be there, but he couldn't be confident of it.
Okay.
But by the time he basically said to the Warren Commission that by the time he left his house that morning, that if he had the chance, he was going to shoot Oswald.
Okay, if he had the chance.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's almost like, okay, I'm going to bring my dog in case I don't get that chance.
Right.
But if I do, I'm leaving my dog in the car and I'm going to kill Oswald.
That's right. And he figured that he would be such a hero that he would be able to make bond and drive his dog home.
Now, that's the key thing here, because getting in the mind of Jack Ruby, why would someone want to kill Lee Harvey Oswald? And there's multiple reasons, but it sounds to me like the main reason was that he was, in his own deranged way, thought that somehow he would be hailed as a hero.
He thought he would be hailed as a hero, but the other thing that he was afraid of was that Jews would be blamed for the assassination.
Because of that Bernard Weissman ad, I assume.
That's right. And a few minutes after he was arrested, he was taken up to an upper floor in the Dallas police station. And the first person to interview him was a Secret Service agent. And the Secret Service agent asked, and he didn't have a lawyer. The Secret Service agent, who was a man named Forrest Sorrells, asked Ruby why he did it. And his answer was, I had to show the world a Jew had guts.
Oh my gosh. You know, it's sad how deranged he was. His love for Kennedy, his love for his Jewish faith,
right,
and his derangement that somehow he thought he would be a hero. Doesn't make sense to the rational person, but to him it made sense.
Yeah.
Judge, I'm going to do something I've never done in all my podcasts. And it's a compliment to you. Our podcasts never go beyond an hour, but this one's going to go beyond an hour because this is the most heavily investigated murder case in the history of the world. I don't think I'm exaggerating. And it is a seminal moment in the history of civilization, certainly our country. It deserves an extra 30 minutes if you're up to it. So we normally divide these into 2 segments. We're going to divide this podcast into 3 segments. And if you're up for it, take a deep breath, because we haven't even gotten into the subtitle yet. The name of your book is JFK, Oswald, and Ruby. But we haven't talked about so much politics, prejudice, and truth.
We've talked a little bit about politics.
We did. We have talked a little bit about that.
We talked about prejudice.
We did, because of the
we haven't dealt with the problem.
Truth.
Yes.
So what we're going to do for the next 30 minutes is we're going to delve into the truth. And I think a good place to start is what Earl Warren, who was the chairman, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the chairman of the commission, said to you and your fellow Warren commissioners as to what the mission of the Warren Commission was.
We had our first staff meeting. I believe the date was January 21st. By the time we had the entire staff assembled, and we met with the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice said to us, "Your only client is the truth." your only client is the truth.
Maybe one of the greatest quotes in history. I love that. Your only client is the truth.
Yeah, and that really was our message. Look at, we wanted to find a conspiracy. You know, our country was in great danger. A man had just assassinated the president of the United States, and then somebody had killed him. There very well could be a international conspiracy. And this was a man who had shot the president, who had defected to the Soviet Union, and who wanted to help Castro.
Exactly. He had ties to Castro, ties to Russia. It's logical that there would be a conspiracy here. That at least you would think that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we were determined to find a conspiracy if the conspiracy existed.
So how did you go about determining whether there was a conspiracy? I suppose one of the things is you have to find out if there's a relationship between Oswald and those who want to kill him, whether there's a relationship between Ruby and Oswald, all those kinds, whether there's a relationship between Ruby and organized crime, all these kinds of things you have to go down. Each different avenue leads somewhere else.
And there were over 20,000 people who were questioned.
Oh.
And we could find no connection. This, I tried to detail a little bit of the story of what Ruby did, but we had no connections between Ruby and organized crime, or Ruby and Oswald, or Ruby and anybody else. I mean, all we knew, and there were lots of people who saw Ruby during this period from the time that the president was assassinated. In fact, we attempted to trace every thing that Ruby did from the moment that Ruby could have known that the president was coming to Dallas, and that would have been in early October of 1963. So we tried to, on a day-by-day basis, determine what Ruby did in all of these days and who his connections were. And the same kind of thing was done with respect to Oswald. And let me say that one of the things that becomes significant is that I think that if we had known today what we know now, that it is very unlikely that Oswald even thought in any respect about the possibility that that Kennedy was coming to Dallas in November, because 10 days before Oswald shot the president, he was so upset about the way in which an FBI agent was bothering his wife that he went to the FBI agent, whose name was James Hosty, and left Hosty a threatening note telling him to stay away from his wife. So it's hard for me to believe that if someone was thinking about assassinating the president, that 10 days before that he would have gone to the FBI and left a threatening note for the FBI.
So if he wasn't planning a week or two before to kill Kennedy, when did he decide to kill Kennedy?
I think he decided to kill Kennedy when about 4 or 5 days before the assassination, when his marriage and his life in general was falling apart. Oswald was not living with his wife at that point. His wife was living with another woman whose name was Ruth Payne. And he telephoned his wife every noon and every day after his workday was over. But they were not living together. He was living in a rooming house. As I said, Marina was living with Ruth Payne. When he did not call Marina as he normally would have on Sunday. And Marina had a phone number for him and tried to call him on Sunday. That's Sunday before the Friday that the assassination occurred.
Yes.
Someone answered the phone at the rooming house and said that no one by Lee Oswald lived there. The person said that because he was living there under a fictitious name. He was living there under the name of O.H. Lee, like Lee Harvey Oswald backward. But he was O.H. Lee. And he did not call Marina on Sunday, but he did call her on Monday. And when Marina said that she had made the phone call and asked why they said he didn't live there, he said he didn't live there, but he told her that he was using this fictitious name. She got very upset with him, and she hung up the phone. The next day, on Tuesday, she wouldn't answer the phone. And so my best guess is that what happened was that with his life falling apart in various other ways, is having no political future in the United States, the possibility that if that the Walker movement might be blamed for anything that was done to Kennedy, that this was an opportunity for him to do something politically important and hopefully escape.
So in some ways, Ruby and he both had these delusions of grandeur. He thought that somehow he would be perhaps a hero to people like Fidel Castro, just as Jack Ruby thought he might be a hero to the American people.
You're absolutely right.
There's so many conspiracy theories. We'd have to talk for another couple hours. There have been movies about these conspiracy theories, but do me a favor and just identify the one or two major conspiracy theories, like the Zapruder firm, for example, and whether it was a single bullet or two bullets. Help the audience understand what these conspiracy theories were all about and why you personally believe that they're not true.
Well, one of the reasons I personally believe they're not true is because there's no evidence to support them.
Right.
And when you do look at Oswald or Ruby, and you really come to understand who those people are and what was happening in their lives, you realize that there's no connection in any way between what the conspiracy theorists are talking about and either Ruby or Oswald. Now, there's, the major theory with respect to Oswald is Oliver Stone's movie JFK.
Yes, which I've seen. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's well. Go ahead. Tell.
No, I don't know the film as well as you do. You got to summarize it.
Well, I don't really know it that well either because
okay.
Because what I did was I went to see the movie, and I wrote an op-ed piece for the Plain Dealer, and I said it was an exciting movie, but it was all fiction.
Okay.
And I never went to see it again. But what I did do was call Congressman Stokes, and it turns out that Congressman Stokes had seen the movie, and our audience probably doesn't realize it, but he conducted a second investigation that was called. He was the chairperson of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which were looking at both the assassination of President Kennedy and the assassination of Martin Luther King.
And am I correct that in part was because even though the Warren Commission did a thorough job, there were still people who thought that it was a conspiracy, so you had to look at it one more time.
That's right, and one of the reasons that people thought that we had to look at it a second time was that both the CIA and the FBI had concealed evidence, withheld evidence from us.
Well, that's pretty important.
the CIA had never told us that they were trying to assassinate Castro on the very day that Kennedy was shot.
Wow. And that would certainly establish a motive, wouldn't it?
That absolutely would.
A motive for Fidel Castro to hire somebody to kill Kennedy.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So the second thing that was withheld from us was the fact that Oswald had left this threatening note for FBI agent James Hosty. Now, if we had known that at the time, it actually would have helped us greatly in understanding, as we said a few minutes ago in our conversation, when Oswald might have started to be thinking about shooting President Kennedy. But when the public then became aware that a threatening note had been destroyed, then not only we had not been told about this, but James Hosty had destroyed the note. So that raises the other question: what are they withholding?
Yes. And it raises all sorts of theories that even the American government itself could have been involved.
Right.
Let's talk to me for a moment about the fact that there was this film made by a man by the name of Abraham Zapruder.
Yes.
He was one of the eyewitnesses. And it sort of looks like a home movie, but he captured a lot of what happened watching the motorcade. And some people have said that reveals some things that were not that are contrary to the conclusions of the Warren Commission. Is that right?
Some people have argued that, but the truth of the matter is that these films actually confirm and give us much better detail of what the sequence of shots might have been, and how much time elapsed between Kennedy's being struck with one bullet and then being struck in the head with a second bullet.
Okay. Now, just recently, there was a new conspiracy theory that came about. A Secret Service agent who's about 88 years old says there was another bullet involved. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm happy to. I actually feel very sorry for Paul Landis. I know Paul Landis. In fact, Lee, he's within walking distance of all of our houses.
He is? I didn't know that.
He lives in Shaker Heights.
I'll be darned. I didn't even realize that.
In the Sussex neighborhood in Shaker Heights.
So if you wanted to see him recently to talk to him about this?
Yeah. No, well, no, and I know Landis. I met Landis before he published his book.
What's his theory?
He actually claims that he doesn't have any theory, that he's not claiming that there was a conspiracy.
Okay.
He doesn't. All he knows is that he now says 60 years later, for the first time published in any event, that he found an intact bullet on the back seat of the presidential limousine, that he put it in his pocket, that he found it there because he was a Secret Service agent who was protecting Jacqueline Kennedy. And when the limousine got to Parkland Hospital, he helped Jacqueline Kennedy get out of the car, and he accompanied her to Parkland Hospital. And that as he was helping her get out of the car, he saw a fully intact bullet on the back seat of the car. He put it in his pocket, and then he says he took it to Parkland Hospital and put it on the stretcher that John Kennedy had been on. Well, the fact of the matter is that there was a bullet that was found in Parkland Hospital, not in the limousine, but in Parkland Hospital, and it was not on or near Kennedy's stretcher. It was at a very different location on John Connolly's stretcher. Now,
John Connolly being the governor of Texas at the time.
That's right. And we haven't said anything about Connolly, and I'm going to kind of say, unless you want to take another half hour on this.
Well, I don't think I do, but I do want the listeners to know that John Connally was in the car, I think in front of
Right
John
in
F.
front.
Kennedy, in the same car, and actually he was wounded during that,
Yeah.
wasn't he?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But here's the Landis theory.
Okay.
The Landis theory is that somehow the first bullet that struck President Kennedy struck him in the back of the neck, but didn't go through the neck, and thus wound up somehow being squeezed out of his neck. Goodness knows how, and wound up on the back seat of the car. Now, here's the evidence. Let me say that the Landis has given at least 4 different statements about this before he published this in his book. He gave 2 written statements within 7 days of the assassination, official statements for the Secret Service, in which he mentions finding nothing, no bullet or anything.
Interesting.
On the 20th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy, he told a newspaper reporter that he did see a fragment of a bullet on the back seat of the car. He doesn't say what he did with it at that point. 5 years after that, on the 25th anniversary, he told another newspaper reporter, I believe it was the Columbus Dispatch, that he found a fragment on the back of the car, on the back seat of the car, and put it in his pocket. Or no, that he gave it to somebody, but he doesn't remember who he gave it to. He doesn't mention a bullet on any of these occasions.
Really?
So, I want to say that I feel sorry for Paul Landis, because I do think that he really suffered a post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think it's possible for people to have false memories.
Yes.
But the truth of the matter is that what we know is there's an entry wound on the back of the president's neck. There was, when the president got to Bethesda, Maryland, where the autopsy was performed, there was another hole in the front of his neck. But the Bethesda doctors knew that it was a hole that was put into the front of his neck when the doctors at Parkland Hospital performed a tracheotomy. So the Bethesda doctors called the Parkland doctors, and the Parkland doctors said they put the tracheotomy in the front of his neck because there was a hole in the front of his neck. So what the doctors then at Bethesda and Parkland knew, that there was a hole in the front of his neck and there was a hole in the back of his neck, but there were no bullets in the president's neck. Well, even if there was a bullet that somehow did not go all the way through, and a second bullet then came, which the Parkland doctors thought this was a bullet hole. That's why they had put it in the front of the neck. That's why they had put the tracheotomy there. There should be another bullet in his body.
Wow.
There were no bullets in the president's body. But what we do know is that when the bullet that we think and the doctors think went through from the back of the president's neck and exited the front, the fibers on the president's shirt and the back of the neck were pressed inward, and the fibers on the shirt in the front of the neck were pressed outward.
Okay.
So it's pretty good circumstantial evidence, and there's other circumstantial evidence. So what my point about Landis is, I think he's got a false memory. I don't think he's a liar.
That's fair. Now, Judge, this podcast is going to be released on the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It will be released on November 22nd, 2023. And if there's ever a time when it's important to talk the truth, it's now, because there are too many people in public life today who do not speak the truth. In fact, they try to invent facts and call it the truth. So my question to you is this: what are the lessons that we can learn from your book and from what happened here? And how can we make sure that every law student listening understands that your client always should be the truth?
What it means is, one is that we have to look with skepticism at every witness. So in searching for the truth, we don't accept what the witness says. We look for contradictory evidence. We try to understand who that person is. And in some cases, we have had witnesses who did not tell us the truth. But we also have to look with the same skepticism about every theory that is proposed. We have to ask, is there really evidence of this? Is there credible evidence of this? And you know, you may disagree with me, Lee, on this, but I say in the book that trials are not a search for the truth. Trials are a contest in which each side is trying to win. And unfortunately, lawyers do not want their clients to say things that will be harmful to them.
True.
They want to prevent harmful evidence from being introduced against them. So trials, unfortunately, are an effort to win and not an effort to get the truth.
But isn't it fair to say that the role of the jury and the judge is to search for the truth?
Absolutely. The role of the judge is to, if there is a jury trial, the role of the judge is to try to make it difficult for unreliable evidence to be presented.
Okay.
And the role of the jury is to separate out the conflicting evidence. But neither the lawyers nor the jury just accepts what they have. The
Right.
judge accepts what is presented. But none of the lawyers' job is to go and find out what is the bottom line of what actually happened. And that's what the Warren Commission tried to do, to get to the bottom line on this. And there have now been 4 different official investigations that deal with trying to find the truth. The National Academy of Sciences did an investigation about the credibility of the witnesses who claimed that there's acoustics evidence that shows that a shot was fired from the so-called grassy knoll. That was an official investigation. In addition, actually, I think there have been actually 6 official investigations. And so anyhow, there's nobody who, none of these official investigations have found a conspirator. And the Stokes investigation, that is the House Select Committee's investigation, and the Warren Commission absolutely agreed that Oswald was the shooter, and absolutely agreed with everything with respect to Ruby also.
And I should add that Congressman Louis Stokes is also a graduate of our law school.
Right. Right.
You know, Judge.
So maybe they're the conspirators, Lee.
Yeah, well, you've convinced me
Okay.
Especially after reading this book. Because at one time I read the Warren Commission too, but it's been a long time. But I did read your
Yeah.
book. You have convinced me that although there was plausible reasons to believe that there was a conspiracy, there was no evidence to back it up.
Right.
Well,
I thank you very much. Can I tell people the name of the book?
I want you to do some shameless promotion for the next 60 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the book is JFK, Oswald and Ruby. That's an easy 3 words to remember. And then there's a colon after, which is politics, prejudice, and truth, which is really what the book is about.
It is. And I'm glad you ended with the truth, because that's the most important part, because you have to sort through politics and prejudice to get to the truth. And you have lived up to your reputation, not only now as a great judge, but as a great author and a great storyteller. And in this case, the story is true. This is nonfiction. It's not fiction. And I hope that, I know there's already been a documentary that's been done, which I saw, but I'd like this to be made into a feature-length movie that talks about the truth, to combat the one of years ago that was probably more fiction than truth. So we'll talk about that at another time. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you, first of all, for writing the book. Thank you for taking the time. I noticed you didn't look at a single note. You know this case probably better than anybody in the world at this moment. And that says something, because it's one of the most complicated cases, if not the most complicated murder case in the history of our country. And you're the expert. So Judge Burt Griffin, thank you for taking the time. And our listeners will hear this in 3 different segments, the first time in the history of our podcast. And it'll be released on a very important day, November 22nd, 1963, the 60th anniversary of the assassination of the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. Thank you, Judge Burt Griffin.
Thank you for the invitation.